Everyone, welcome to another series. These series are going to be around authentication. In this first episode, we're going to talk a little bit about the middleware changes in .NET Core 3 and how to wire it up. So we're going to start from the basics, and the main thing that I'm going to try to make a point of is to explain what it is that is a user and how it is represented. So in object orientation, you basically grab an object, you specify its properties, right? So here we're going to try to understand when it is that you sign in into an application, what is this user and basically how it's created and where it's stored. Okay, so let's go ahead and create a new project. I'm going to take ASP.NET Web Application. Let's click Next. I'm going to give it a project name of Basics and solution name. I'll just give it Authentication, and I'm just going to select a different folder to put this into. Let's create a new folder here. Say, actually, that should create the folder for me. So, boom. Let's create that, and I'm gonna start with just the empty template. Okay, so let's close that, and let's quickly go into the startup.cs. I'm not gonna go over too much, too much about .NET Core 3, just to basically make a point of ASP. About the use routing and the use endpoints. Just so you know, use routing looks at the route that you're accessing and then decides which endpoint is going to be used. So, and the endpoint is going to be the functionality, right? So whichever action you write, that is going to be mapped to an endpoint, and use routing is what is going to decide which endpoint is going to be invoked. So let's go ahead and just set up MVC, and this is just going to be the standard way to showcase authentication, right? So we're gonna map controllers, and I'm actually gonna add map controllers with default, map default controller route. So this is going to give me the default notation for controllers. And the next thing that I will need to do is in services, I will need to add controllers with views. So just so I can have some views as well. Alright, so now I'm gonna go ahead, I'm gonna create a new folder. I'm gonna call it controllers, and then in there I'll just create a home controller.cs. And here let's go ahead and inherit from controller. So this is gonna be our first controller. We're gonna import ASP.NET Core MVC, clean that up. So let's create a public action result index, and this is just going to be the home page. Then I want to create a page that we are going to authorize, right? So this authorization attribute we'll talk about in a second, but I'm gonna call this page secret. Okay, and let's just return view so we can have these thingies here. And let's create another one, and this will be authenticate. So this is when we're actually going to be creating the user, right? So this is going to be the main star of the show. And once we're done, I'm just going to go ahead and redirect to action index. And voila. Okay, so authorize attribute is mainly used to basically guard an action. So let's say we have this secret action and we just want to authorize someone, right? So authorization basically asks the question, are you allowed to come here? And what this is going to do, this authorization attribute, is let's launch it and let's take a look. First of all, we're going to get an error, and this error will be justifiable. So we shouldn't have a page. Oh, we don't have pages. So let's go ahead and quickly set that up. So views, home, index.cs HTML. Let's give this an H1 of homepage. Let's create a few more pages. I'll call one secret CS HTML. I'll call this secret page. Let's create another one, and actually no, we don't need another one. What this will do, essentially give me two pages. I'll refresh this and I will end up on the home page, hopefully, and I will use the routing to navigate. Okay, So we're on the home page, and now if I will go onto the secret page, what will happen is, first of all, in the startup, we'll hit the use routing point of the middleware, and then it will find which endpoint we want to go to. Okay, so let's go ahead and go there, and we get a 404 because I have not specified controller, so /home secret page. Okay, so here we get an exception that is basically saying you don't have any authorization middleware. So what it's trying to tell us is, right, I'm trying to ask the question, are you allowed to come here? But I don't know how, because we haven't told it where or how. So depending on where we put it in this middleware, that's at the point that it's going to ask the question. So let's go ahead and try to ask the question of authorization before we found out what route it is, right? So we're going to try to authorize before we even know which action we're trying to go to. Okay, so let's go back here and let's try to go to home secret again, and we arrive at the secret page, right? So how could we arrive here? We're not, we haven't done anything, so this authorization attribute isn't guarding. So what happens is we reach authorization here, and it sort of safely exits. It fails here, but safely exits. And then it finds which route we have to be at, and then it finds the action, and it executes. So this authorize attribute doesn't really mean anything if it's not found at the correct time. Okay, so if we put it after we found the routing, so we find the route, we find which action we want to execute, and now we basically try to authorize. Okay, so let's go ahead and give this a refresh. And now once we try to access home.secret, this is where it's basically telling us, right, you need authentication. And the reason it's asking for authentication is because to be able to ask, are you allowed to go here? We need to know who you are. If we don't know anything about you, you're not allowed to go here, but we can't even ask the question of, are you allowed to go here, if we don't know who you are or we have no way to find out. So let's go ahead and do what it suggests us to do to basically add the authentication scheme. So here we're going to go into services, and what this service will allow us to do, it will create an object that will be injected into the authorization as a handler. So it will. This is trying to execute a function which will essentially try to find the user context, but we don't have anything for that handler to be injected into one of the services inside authorization. Okay, so let's go ahead into services and add authentication, right? And I'm just gonna call this schema cookie auth. Okay, because what I'm gonna do is I'm gonna add a cookie schema like this. I'm gonna give it some configuration, right? And what this configuration will do is essentially allow me to configure this, how this authentication works. So I can do stuff like set the login path. I can give this cookie a new name. So I can say, let's say, Ramus.cookie. Okay, so this is going to be Ramus cookie. So here what we're specifying is a cookie handler. So this is going to be producing a implementation of an authentication handler, and it's going to be a cookie handler. Okay, and that implementation is going to be injected into here, and now it will be able to check if you're authenticated or not. Okay, so let's see what we end up with. Let's refresh this. Okay, so now what it's doing is it's trying to redirect us to account/login, and this is the default way, and this is really something that we can fix here. So the login path, let's specify /home/authenticate. So what's going to happen is I'm going to try to redirect to this route, and I'm going to just say right? Just create a user right there. There's going to be no login forms, nothing, right? So just remember, this is the base, this is the default value for the login path. So let's go ahead and refresh this. Let's go to home secret again, /home secret. Okay, and redirects us to the home page. So what happened? Essentially, it redirected us to the authenticate page, and then we ended up back at the home page. Okay, cool. Can we access the home secret page again? If not, we will end up at the index page again, and we do. So basically, right now it's recognizing that we are not authorized because it just doesn't know who we are. Okay, because we haven't told the application who we are. So now that it has a way to tell who we are, when we try to when it asks the question, "Are you allowed to go here?" It basically, because the cookie is missing, because we don't have one. So if we go into applications and cookies, we don't have any cookies for this website. So we don't have a cookie. It doesn't know who we are. You're not getting in, right? If you don't have the Grammar's cookie, all right? So let's go ahead into this authenticate function. And now in here, we're going to create a user, right? So what is a user? So if you think about how you are modeled in real life, you either have like a passport, or you have a driving license, or you have some kind of relative that can vouch for yourself. So let's say we'll pick two examples to create or to basically build up an identity. Okay, so let's first part of your identity will be, let's say that the grandma will say who you are. Okay, so let's say grandma claims, and this is going to be a list of the claim object. Now it's important to understand that the claim is an abstract concept and the claim object is an implementation, right? So this is not specific to Microsoft. This object is just specific to C# and how Microsoft chose to implement claims, okay? So grandma claims, right? For our claims, we can go ahead, create new claim, and their parameters are pretty much key, or what kind of claim it is. So we can say claim type, and it will be stuff like name. So according to your grandma, you're Bob, and according to her, your email is at bobfmail.com, right? And then your grandma, she might say something nice about you, but this will be a claim that is unique to the grandma, right? So it will be like grandma dot says very very nice boy. Okay, so this is something that your grandma says about you, but because we trust your grandma as an authority, we will accept her description of you, and if she recognizes you, we will allow you to authenticate. So the next thing that we're going to do is we're basically going to create an identity based on these claims, right? So let's create a grandma identity. So this will be a new claims identity, and we're just going to pass grandma claims here, and we're going to say that it's grandma identity, right? So we're basically just giving this a name, that this is where the identity claims come from, right? So your grandma claims that you're this, and we trust your grandma, so we allow you to be identified as grandma claims, right? And then what we do is we go ahead and create a user principal, which is going to be a claims principal, and what this is going to accept is an array of claim identities, right? So as I said in the beginning, you can consist of many identities, because many authorities can say who you are. So Facebook and Google may see you may be authenticated with different emails, different names, but once you authenticate, you can have many identities, but you're essentially, you have the same information. Sorry, you have different information according to the correct authority. So let's go ahead and create a second one. So license claims. So you shown your driver's license, and this is what these are going to be. And let's copy it to these claims. This is really just another example. So driving license, let's say A+. All right, so you're a very good driver. I don't know what driving claims you are, right? And let's say that name, they know your full name, unlike your grandma who has Alzheimer's. Let's say you're Bob K who. Okay, and let's go ahead and create a license identity. Let's have license, and here we're gonna pretty much say that this is, I don't know, the government who looks after licenses. This is what they say in their old driving license department about you, right? And because we trust the driving license department, we're gonna allow you to have this identity as well. Okay. So once we have this user principal, which is essentially can be a collection of identities and different claims, what we're gonna do is, again, this is an implementation that .NET Core provides to you. We are gonna grab the HTTP context and we're gonna call the sign in async function. You won't see it straight away, but you will need to import the Microsoft ASP.NET Core authentication package, and we're gonna put in user principal into here. Okay, and the essence, basically what this function does, first part is sort of building up your identity. So if you ever used Microsoft Identity, where you have your own users and passwords, etc., once you are authenticated, it's going to grab all the stuff from the database, it's going to assemble it into these objects, and it's going to go ahead and create this user principal, and under the hood it will call this function. Okay, and this is all that it's doing, and this is the base implementation sort of thing. So let's go ahead and see how this works. Let's go ahead and run this. So we're on the home page. Let's go ahead into home secret, and now we should be able to see a cookie. So here we have a grandma's cookie, and in here in the value, essentially this is what represents you as this object. And now if we're gonna go into home secret, we're still not going to be able to reach that page, because the reason is going to be the same as for the first time that we tried to hit this authorize point, is that in the middleware, or rather the middleware, needs to be able to check who we are. Okay, so we have the providers, but we are not actually bringing it up in the middleware. So let's go ahead and use authentication, but we're gonna use it after authorization, right? So the logical steps are to ask if you're allowed to go here. We need to know who you are, right? So this asks who, sorry, not who are you allowed, right? And if we say something like who are you, and we'll use use authentication, right? So if you think about this logically, who are you? If we ask who are you after if you're allowed, it doesn't really match, because we need to know who you are after we ask and are you, okay, we know who you are, and are you allowed to go here? So the behavior should be identical, so we will keep getting redirected. So what we want to do is ask who you are before we ask if you're allowed, right? So here is where, again, this is going to be injected, and the HTTP context user object, so this object here, will be populated from the cookie, and the session, and this is when the authorization middleware will be able to utilize what has been populated here to basically then say, right, are you actually allowed to reach this endpoint that the use routing has found here? And this is where the functionality for this function will actually be executed. Okay, so let's go ahead and launch this. And because when we launch this, the cookie is saved in the browser, let's go ahead to home secret, and now we can reach the page. Okay, so this is the basics of how authentication works and how the authentication middleware essentially finds the route, and when it finds the route, it already knows which endpoint to execute. Okay, so then we are basically using this middleware, use authentication middleware, to populate our user object inside the HTTP context, and then we use authorization for what we have populated here to essentially decide, right, are you allowed to go here? And if we have not populated anything here, the authorized attribute doesn't know, if we're not even using it, the authorized attribute doesn't know how to ask the question. And then if we essentially, according to these two middlewares, we pass and are allowed to use this function, we can go ahead and execute it. Okay, so this will be it for this episode. Thanks for watching. If you enjoyed it, leave a like, subscribe. As always, if you have any questions, leave them in the comments. I love answering your questions. And as always, see you in my other episodes.